Hey everybody. Today we're going to go over stepped compression. Before we begin, let me start by talking a little bit about the theory behind stepped compression at its core. Whether it be plugins or outboard compressors, what you're doing is splitting the work amongst multiple compressors instead of trying to do all of your compression or handling of the dynamic range with just one unit or plugin. So I'll show you with a few plugins today how instead of compressing, say, 15 dB with one compressor to get a lead vocal to sit nice and up front, you might compress 5 dB with 3 different compressors. Now the plugins don't have to be the same, they don't have to be different. I typically would use different plugins just to get different flavors, different attacks, releases, and such. So let's start by doing all the work with one compressor and let you listen a little bit to our song without compression on the lead vocal. I'll just play the section that we're going to be working on.
Cocktails and cigarettes, and this is how it's done. You tell me about Hollywood, and wouldn't that be fun? Don't believe it, it's true. Cocktails and cigarettes.
All right, so let's hear the lead vocal with one compressor doing all the work. I'll leave the attack and release settings on the default, and I'll just mess with the input and output. When you're dealing with compressors that don't have a threshold knob, such as this one, your input is going to control how much gain reduction you get.
Cocktails and cigarettes, and this is how it's done.
So obviously output is your makeup gain or your output gain, and you need to adjust it accordingly as well. So I'll adjust it so we're hitting right around -6.
Cocktails and cigarettes, and this is how it's done. You tell me about Hollywood, and wouldn't that be fun?
And just for a different flavor, let's hear some other plugins compressing about the same amount. Let's go over to our stock DigiDesign compressor, and let's...
Cocktails and cigarettes, and this is how it's done.
And I'm just going to make up
You tell me about Hollywood,
about the same amount of gain.
wouldn't that be fun? Don't believe it, it's true. I wanna get to know the real you. Cocktails and cigarettes, and this is how it's done.
So you can tell it does make it more upfront, but you can really hear the compressor working. Let's try one more, one of our favorites, the R compressor. And I'll just grab the lead vocal setting.
Cocktails and cigarettes, and this is how it's done. You tell me about Hollywood, and wouldn't that be fun? Don't believe it, it's true. I wanna get to know the
And you can really tell in the transients of the words, you can hear the vocal digging into the compressor. So that's what we don't want. We want to be able to get the same amount of compression, but through using either different attack and release settings, lower ratios, all of these things. But most of all, in this example, by using 3 separate compressors to achieve the same amount of gain reduction, we'll be able to do so without hearing the compressor work so hard. So let's go ahead and open up another compressor. And you can think of it, while I'm doing this, I'll give you an analogy. You can think of it like one person doing a really hard job, let's say manual labor, versus 3 different people splitting that manual labor and only having to do 1/3 of the work. Which scenario is going to complain more? Which are you going to hear more about? You're going to hear the one person that's having to do all the work, whereas the 3 people won't complain as much. And let's use just another R compressor to finish the chain. Again, this could be any compressor. Any plug-in or outboard compressor can provide you with stepped compression. So I'll just start with the vocal preset on R compressor. Let's go back to factory default and then load the vocal compressor so our settings are all nice. Presets are just a good place to start, as we've talked about before. They're not an end-all be-all. This is not my vocal setting, but it does go ahead and get me a ratio that's pretty safe on a vocal, and it does get me an attack and release that I can work with. So then I can start by just adjusting the threshold and then adjusting the gain to make up for that. So let's get started.
Cocktails and cigarettes, and this is how it's done. You tell me about Hollywood, and wouldn't that be fun? Don't believe it, it's true. I wanna get to know the real you.
All right, so there's our first compressor. Let's go ahead and add in the second one.
Cocktails and cigarettes, and this is how it's done. You tell me about Hollywood, and wouldn't that be fun? Don't believe it, it's true.
All right, and let's add in the third one. Keeping in mind that I'm not spending a ton of time on the settings of the compressor, I'll leave that to your ears to do that while you can really sit and listen and take some time on it, especially with a lead vocal. It's usually the most important thing in a track, so you really want to take your time with it. But I don't want the video to be super long for you. So let's go ahead and we'll start with our preset again, but we'll really change this one up.
Cocktails and cigarettes, and this is how it's done. You tell me about Hollywood, and wouldn't that be fun? Don't believe it, it's true. I wanna get to know the real you. Cocktails and cigarettes, and this is how it's.
All right, so what I'll do now is I'll open the compressors, and if you just shift click, you can see more than one plugin at the time, and I'll try to put them in an order. So we have our first compressor, second compressor, third compressor. So with Pro Tools or most DAWs, the signal flow literally goes top down. So 1, 2, 3. All right, so let's play it.
Cocktails and cigarettes, and this is how it's done.
So now I'm going to play it. You can see the visual of each compressor working. The meters are showing gain reduction, and then the meter on the side here by the vocal meter is the overall gain reduction of the track. If your Pro Tools does not show you the overall gain reduction, there's a preference under Pro Tools preferences for how you want your gain reduction meters set. So what I'll do is I will play it and I'll give you the before and after. You can hear it now with the stepped compression, and you can hear it without the stepped compression.
Cocktails and cigarettes, and this is how it's done. You tell me about Hollywood, and wouldn't that be fun? Don't believe it, it's true. I wanna get to know the real.
So you can definitely hear the difference. It brings the vocal more up front and still gives it a life, whereas one compressor doing all this compression will, as you have heard, will choke it out to an extent, make it sound very compressed. This tends to leave the life in the vocal and still give you all the good things that you're going for out of a compression. You're going to have to automate volumes less. You're going to have less trouble fitting the vocal in the mix. It has a nice solid presence. You will have more sibilance, so remember to use a de-esser on popular music. You will have more sibilance, the more that you compress. It's just a natural effect of compression that it brings more and more highs out because the lows are the first thing to get compressed. More on that later. So remember to use a de-esser either before or after your compressors. Different people have different preferences as far as where to put them in their vocal chain. Also, if you hear that it brings out something that you don't like in the vocal, you can always just add an EQ after the compression. So that's it for the most part. That's your stepped compression. Again, remember you can play with the attacks and releases, and I've overdone the gain reduction so that you could hear the effect better, but typically I would do about 3 dB of gain reduction or less per plugin. So I hope that helps. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy the next lesson.